As always, the NBA does not disappoint, and we can't go 3 or 4 days without major breaking news. And yesterday was no exception. Bradley Beal traded to the Phoenix Suns with a couple other guys, it seems. And the Suns give up Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, a couple pick swaps, and some second-round picks. Want to get your thoughts on the trade overall before, and I'll provide some thoughts as well. But before we go there, it's very interesting to me what we have seen in trades over the last couple off seasons, where teams have really prioritized retaining future firsts. And in this case, you have a guy who's made all-star teams, who's made all-NBA teams, still reasonably in the prime of his career, and no actual first-round picks. I mean, you started getting into the pick swaps, and I was reading an article earlier today going forward because of the picks that were given up to Brooklyn in the Kevin Durant deal. There's just not a lot of options in the near term to sort of recuperate any sort of draft compensation on this outside of the second round picks. It's not till really like 2030 potentially that you have the hope, if you're the Washington Wizards, of the Suns sucking and you being good and you latching on to something. So that's one thought. The other thought is the prohibitive nature of a no trade clause as it relates to an open trade market. Because Bradley Beal and his agent, Mark Bartelstein, who we have given plenty of praise before, essentially got to choose where he wanted to go. And for the first time in a long time, the Wizards seem like they are well on their way to a full rebuild. Now it remains to be seen if they can create some sort of draft compensation or target a young player for Chris Paul, but in all likelihood, and we'll get to Chris in a second as our second thing, in all likelihood, Chris is on his way to one of the teams in LA.
So my two thoughts are I think going to be apparent in this question. First of all, will there ever be a no trade clause in the NBA again? Because I don't think that there should be. My second sort of thought and question is there anything defensible for Wizards fans, people who follow the Wizards, whatever, besides the fact that the rebuild is finally starting, which they've probably needed to do for the last 2 or 3 years, because otherwise this trade is like an F for them. I mean, they got more for when they traded John Wall. They got more when they traded Russ. Brad, we can go through his numbers in a second, but Brad is still he's a 3-time All-Star, he's an All-NBA guy. He has the potential. He scored 31 points 2 years ago a game. He's second leading scorer in the NBA, and it's like you're getting second round picks and pick swaps. And it just, I want to talk about Phoenix too. And I know you talked about it a little bit on First Take today, but it feels very hard to find any positives in this for DC besides the fact that they finally have ripped the Band-Aid off.
Man, I'm way to just shit on DC and all the fans and just providing no sense of hope.
What is it? I mean, you could say that starting the rebuild is a positive, so that's a good thing. But
you know what? So first of all, on the no trade thing, I think it will still happen, and I think it will be a rarity, as it's always been. According to our crack research team at First Take, I believe there's 10 players that have had a no trade clause. It'll be generally reserved, and probably more reserved now for people like Nikola Jokic or potentially Giannis in the fall, if he really desires to have sort of some, if he signs his supermax and feels like Milwaukee's the place where he wants to be and he wants to have some control over where he gets traded in the future. I could see Giannis getting one, but generally speaking, I think it'll be reserved for guys like that. Steph Curry's, who hasn't had one, but the Steph Currys of the world. I went back to the 2010 draft. John Wall, number 1 pick that year. The Wizards were not in rebuild mode before they got the number 1 pick. You remember, that was the year that Gilbert Arenas and Javaris Crittenton both got suspended. Gil brought some guns in the locker room. And so they they sort of fell into a 25 and 57 season, or 26 and 56 season, something like that, whatever it was. They had the 5th best odds to get the number 1 pick, and they ended up getting the number 1 pick. So they get the number 1 pick. They draft John Wall. The following year, they get the number 6 pick. They drafted Jan Vesely. The following year, they draft Brad at number 3. The following year, they draft Otto Porter Jr. at number 3. So the last chance they had to build through the draft, they had a couple hits, but no generational player. Let's be clear on that. Like, this is the thing with Philly and the process is you can put yourself in a position to have high draft picks. There's no guarantee in the draft that those draft picks are going to turn into generational players. And by the way, that is not a knock on John Wall and Bradley Beal, who both were Supermax guys and made all NBA teams and made all-star teams and were fantastic players. There's no doubt. But the ceiling for those two guys was the Eastern Conference semifinals.
You could make an argument the best Wizards performance from a Wizards pick over the last couple of years was Rui for the Lakers in the playoffs this year. Like,
don't you talk down on Corey Kispert. That's my he's a good player. He's a good player.
Kispert was solid because Kispert was solid, but they've really missed. I wanted to talk about
real quick, just because since then, so they had all these high picks. Since then, primarily they've drafted, when they haven't been in the playoffs, they've drafted late lottery, and that's harder and harder to draft all-star, all-NBA talent. Not that it doesn't happen, but it's harder to do that later and later in the draft. So there is hope. The hope is, if you're a Wizards fan, you finally get to sort of rebuild after 13 years since the 2010 Gilbert Arenas season.
Yes, it's you rebuild the year after a generational draft is happening. It's just, you know what? It is what it is. I want to talk about Phoenix. We'll talk about Phoenix. I know you talked about Book a little bit earlier this morning, just his fit here. But before that, we talked about this on the mailbag episode last week about how hard it's going to be with the new cap to have 3 max guys. And then right after we had that conversation, they go and do it. So what do you think the ramifications just
4.
from a financial?
They have 4 max guys.
Well, 4 with Ayton. This is assuming Ayton ends up getting moved, which is not a 100% assumption. So 4 max guys for right now. What do you think the financial ramifications are considering the new CBA?
Yeah, so those 4 guys next season, $163 million between them. They're already a luxury tax team. In all likelihood, they will, even if they move someone, they will be a luxury tax team for the foreseeable future. The second apron, the sort of heavy restrictions around that will kick in 2 years. So when I first saw the deal, I was like, man, this does it. I don't quite get it, because history and recent history has shown that the super teams don't work, and that you need to be able to build through the draft, which they obviously traded all their picks away, along with Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, 2 players that they had drafted for Kevin Durant. Brian Windhorst had a great article this morning, and the gist of it is this: they were going to be a tax team anyways. And they just sort of doubled down on the move they made with Kevin Durant. Like, this was in some ways a logical next step for them. We're going to have limited availability to get free agents outside of the vet minimum. We are going to go through all their free agents in a second. They've got one guy, and that's Darius Bazley, who has actual bird rights. The rest are either non-bird or early bird. So they're gonna have a hard time this summer getting their own free agents back. So it's gonna be very difficult. However, the one thing I want to say, and I thought about this after I read the Windhorst article and after First Take today. So 2 weeks ago, it was very odd. There's a report. The Suns have told Chris Paul they're going to waive him, and everybody reacted. And then a few other reporters, dialed it back a little bit. Suns exploring all options, including potentially waiving Chris Paul. $15 million guaranteed, obviously, blah, blah, blah. I was thinking about it. So if waiving Chris Paul is an option and eating $15 million and keeping that $15 million of your salary is an option, and you turn Chris Paul into Bradley Beal, that's not a bad outcome at all.
Yeah, I agree.
That's not a bad outcome. So
there was no other team that was, like we just mentioned, as in such a tough spot as the Wizards were, where you could get a guy that is still a potential all-star, potential all-NBA type player for what they gave up. I mean, who else is taking, second round picks and pick swaps for a player like that?
That's exactly. So the other thing I would say is, like, you mentioned Ayton potentially getting moved, and I think it's valid to bring that up. There is some optionality there with Ayton in terms of moving him. There's always buyout season, #buyout season. And it remains to be seen what will happen during free agency and with their own free agents. There's still time to fill out the roster. Will a veteran player take a vet minimum on a 1 year, hope to go win a championship, and sort of parlay that into a bigger contract? Now, my argument on First Take, and I'll repeat this because I think it bears repeating, is that historically speaking, there were opportunities over the last decade plus for a good veteran rotation level player to either take a vet minimum from a team like the Spurs or a team like the Warriors or a team like the Miami Heat, go there, win a championship, compete for a championship, and then become a free agent the following season, or do it again, become a free agent the following season, maybe re-sign. But anyways, there's opportunities, right, to make that money. Now, what has happened with the new CBA, the prior amendments, I should say, to the CBA that were implemented 3 or 4 years ago, is that all of the exceptions have now gone up. So the disparity between a vet minimum and the taxpayer mid-level, or the vet minimum and the mid-level, have gone exponentially higher. Think about this. When I was like playing and I was making these free agency choices, a vet minimum was roughly $2 million. The full mid-level was 5.5. The full mid-level now is 12.5. The taxpayer is 7. So I have a hard time believing, as attractive of a city as Phoenix is, and as attractive of a situation that they have to win a championship, I have a hard time believing that there's guys that are going to be lining up to turn down tens of millions of dollars to go do a 1-year vet minimum contract in Phoenix. Not saying it won't happen. I'm just pointing out the actual economics of the situation.
There just won't be as many. There may be a few, but there won't be as many.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the basketball fit for a second. I was looking at Brad's numbers yesterday. So last year, pull-up jumpers, he was 18th in efficiency in the league. 3-point shooting, we talked about it a little bit this last week. Last year, he was 41% wide open threes, 37.1% catch and shoot threes. He's had a dip from 3 the last 5 years, 34.7%. He was 39.3 the first 6. But I think to his credit, he's taking tougher shots. Just he had a more of a load on him probably when Wall was not there. So what do you think, just from like a fit standpoint with these guys? Because he's going to have a lot of open looks with Book and KD. So we're going to, that 41% number. Who knows if he can match it? But he's going to have a lot more than he did the last 2 or 3 seasons in terms of just open threes.
Yeah, the last time he shot over 40% from 3 was in 2016, 2017. And all of his years shooting over 40% were playing with a young, in prime John Wall. And if you look at the numbers in his career of self-created threes versus catch and shoot threes, it started out, the majority were catch and shoot, and the minority was self-created. That paradigm is now flipped, and I think it'll flip back. I think he won't be tasked with as much self-shot creation. He will do it at times. That's not to say he won't. I don't know what the difference will be, but I would expect him to get more catch and shoot opportunities. And he shot terribly on catch and shoot threes 2 years ago. I think it was something like 29%. Bumped that back up to 40 this year. The fit is really good. You're going to be able, essentially in rotations, when these guys are healthy, you're going to be able to play at any given time. You'll start all three, but at any given time, you'll play two of them on the basketball court a lot. I think something interesting to think about is, like, as good as Kevin Durant is this Devin Booker's team? And I would assume it would be very difficult. I expect them now to guarantee Campaign's contract. It's only partially guaranteed. He becomes the point guard, the de facto point guard. But I do think Devin Booker now has shown, especially this season, coming off that Dallas series where they just blitzed the crap out of him. He's proven himself for a few years now, but especially this past season. Like, put the ball in his hands. He can create shots. He can be a maestro. He's always going to be a score first guy in some respects. But Kevin Durant, another playmaker. It's throughout his career, he's been a great playmaker. Makes the right play. And all three of these guys now get to sort of play off each other. Booker and Durant in particular, they're going to draw double teams. They're going to be able to swing to each other. They're going to be able to get a swing to Bradley Beal. So I think it's interesting in that regard. Now, one of the problems with the super team thing is there's only one basketball, and you're paying three guys max money, and they're going to be on the court together a lot. So that is something that they will have to figure out offensively. They will have to figure that out. Now, defensively, here's where I'm like, I still don't, even if they fill the roster out with rotation level minimum guys, like, I still don't think they should be the favorites, or I wouldn't consider them to be favorites. That's not to say that, if all goes well, they can't win a championship with this group, with this core, I should say, because we don't know what the group is, but they couldn't stop the Denver Nuggets. They couldn't stop the Denver Nuggets. It's like, I don't have all the scores, but like the two games they won, Booker goes for 47. I called the game. Booker goes for 47. Durant goes for 39. Booker shoots 20 of 25. They win 121-114. Game 4, Booker goes for 36 on 14 of 18 shooting. Durant goes for 30 plus as well. Shamet hits 5 threes. They win 129-124. The defensive part of it, which was why I think, you go through Torrey Craig, Josh Okogie in particular, Landale as well. You go through those and you're like, you got to be able to bring some guys back. Now, Josh Okogie, they don't have any bird rights on him. With Torrey Craig and Landale, they have early bird rights. So there is a chance they could bring those guys back. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Like, you still have to be able to beat the Warriors. You have to be able to stop the Warriors. You have to be able to stop the Nuggets. You have to be able to stop the Lakers. And I'm well aware of Frank Vogel's track record. There'll be a competent defense. But that's what I kind of go back to, is like, it's not how I believe in roster construction. It's not how I believe in team building. And for the most part, in recent NBA history, the super team hasn't worked. It's just hasn't worked.
Two names I wanted to throw out as possibilities for free agents. Dylan Brooks. I mean, he may get paid somewhere, but you never know. I mean, maybe a 1 year. And then our guy, Jeff Green, coming off the championship, is another one who obviously goes way back with Kevin, and he may be in a spot where he might want to take a shot at another team. To your point about the super team, I guess that was my question too, is like, when you look at Denver's quote unquote big three, we've talked so much about Aaron Gordon, but Aaron Gordon and how good he was offensively, he was there as the stopper. He was there as the LeBron stopper, he was there as the Jimmy stopper, whatever you may be. I'm like, who is the stopper on this team? Who's that? Who's the guy who's like, okay, your job is to go run around and chase Shea for a playoff series? And maybe it's Book, but I don't know. That's the one thing, even in this group, that seems like it's not like they don't have it, but it's kind of like a wait and see.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, they had some really good defenses under Monty Williams. So this is not like saying, oh, DeAndre Ayton can't be a starting center for a top defense. No, he can. He's shown it. He's done it. It might have to be Book. Book might have to be the guy, right? For wing defense. Yeah. So it's just interesting.